Hey guys, Lost here. Today I wanted to talk about RuneScape, one of the world's highest rated free-to-play MMOs and literally one of the most successful games really of all time. I'm not sure if you knew this, but on October 30th, RuneScape Mobile launched on smartphones, Androids, and iPads alike, and since then things have changed massively for the game. Now I am actually a huge fan of RuneScape, so I decided I wanted to make this video. Today I wanted to talk about the official Revival of Runescape. So, starting with that, let's go back in time. RuneScape was one of the most popular MMOs at the time when MMOs were all of the rage. Coming out in 2001, this game is an extremely old one in terms of video game standards, coming up on its 18th birthday next year, making it one of the longest running successful video games and MMOs that I can certainly think of. That early era of the game is now what we call RuneScape Classic, and until just recently you could actually still play on the RuneScape Classic servers. Like many new games at the time, it started off small, but slowly and surely it grew until it had a very decent sized following. However, despite its success, not as many players seemed to play the game. Maybe because of its cheesy knights and fantasy dragons, had a lot of people think that it was too nerdy to really come out and say that they played it. However, by the time World of Warcraft was released and the MMO craze kind of hit the public, RuneScape had already been in the game for a number of years and already had a fantastic following. RuneScape was kind of like that senior in high school sitting alone when a bunch of hot-headed freshmen all walk in the door. From roughly 2007 to 2010, that's when most players can agree that that was the core of RuneScape's success. That's when the most amount of players enjoyed the maximum amount of fun. During the MMO craze, it seemed like everybody and their brother, including me and my own, played RuneScape. During the MMO craze, RuneScape gathered a devout following, mostly because it took a certain kind of player to play it, hooking players on its grindy mechanics. However, it was so rewarding, it managed to keep players attached. Chasing down that one more level, getting that little bit of extra XP, or trying to get one more weapon kept players coming back more and more despite the game being extremely grindy and extremely time consuming. It kept players hooked, and only a certain kind of player really put themselves into the game and kept at it. However, the one thing that I know kept players coming back, which I think kind of takes precedence over all of the others, was the amount of fantastic social interactions that players could have in the game. RuneScape's social setup was extremely simple. There were no queues to load up in, no things that send you in with random players that you would soon forget of as soon as you were done. The only interaction you could ever really have was with the players standing right next to you. Of course, you could add them and you could talk to them, from different worlds and whatnot, but the only way you could really talk to anybody was if you were standing there face to face. Meaning if you ever went to go skill or craft or cut down trees or fish or anything, when you're standing next to other new players or just players in general, you could always seem to strike up a friendly conversation. You could sit there for hours and talk to a dozen different people, each one skilling for different reasons. Maybe some are going to max out their character, or some are just trying to get up a skill for a quest. It was extremely easy to make new friends and to keep them. A couple months ago, I had a friend hop online who I hadn't spoken to or even played with in probably over 7 or 8 years. We both remembered each other from stuff we used to do back in the day, and we had a very pleasant conversation. And then just like that, we went in our separate ways. Those types of bonds are extremely rare, and we've never even heard each other speak over the phone or anything. We don't even know what each other looks like. But anyway, that was RuneScape's heyday. After the MMO craze began to die down, it was very apparent that RuneScape was getting sick. In 2011, RuneScape was boasting massive player numbers, oftentimes peaking at 250,000 active players during every day. I know most video game companies nowadays would be ecstatic to have numbers like that with its own games. However, many of those players weren't real. You see, they are what we call bots. Essentially, players could run a program on their computer and have their computer move around, gather resources, fight or train and skill without their player ever having to touch their computer. So essentially, the computer was just running their character for them. They could easily run their character for hours or days, gathering tons of resources and selling them, making massive amounts of money without even having to sit down. This led to literally thousands of wordless bots making giant player trains across the game, flooding the market with resources and money, making things worthless, which made it nearly impossible for real players to get ahead. I mean, how can you compete with the bot that trains and skills for 24 hours a day? So in the fall of 2011, Jagex, the creator of RuneScape, released the bot nuke, which essentially wiped out thousands and thousands of fake players. I remember one day looking at the number of players online as a teenager, and I saw a measly 80,000 players online at one point. RuneScape would never be the same after that. Jagex continued to drop smaller bot nukes in a way to combat all of the botting going on and hopefully bring back more players that would actually play the game, but that wasn't the only problem with RuneScape. By 2012, oddly enough, the bots weren't the only thing keeping the players away. Over the years, Jagex had continued updating its game in hopes to keep things new and fresh and keeping the game competitive in the new, industrious MMO market. Despite all the updates and refurbishing of RuneScape, no new players really came in fact many left. And by fall of 2012, players had finally had enough. Jagex had implemented new skills, put in new updates that players never asked for. The RuneScape that had won over the world only a few years ago had slowly fallen away. In November of 2012, RuneScape implemented the Evolution of Combat update, which essentially created what we know as RuneScape 3. This feature is what single-handedly drove many players, including myself, away. It essentially gutted the classic, easy, and well-known combat system that RuneScape had used for so long in a way to make it more like its competitors. With the natural loss of players through the end of the MMO craze and terrible decisions on the part of Jagex, RuneScape had officially entered its dark times. However, there was still hope. This problem had been a growing concern for many players and many people at Jagex. And so in February of 2013, Jagex officially released the old school version of RuneScape. This version was set all the way in 2007, back when I said most players really enjoyed the game. In my opinion, this is the event that actually saved RuneScape. Essentially, they had put a tourniquet on the massive wound that they had created. When old school RuneScape launched, the old school servers and the RuneScape 3 servers collectively had about 110,000 active players. Many old players rushed back to old school RuneScape, however, some were hesitant since you essentially had to recreate your character or start over when you rejoined the old servers. Old school RuneScape was somewhat of a flash in the pan for the game, with no lasting effect immediately. With 8 months after old school had launched, there were only about 30,000 players collectively on both servers combined. However, from that spark, the game began to regrow. A year and a few months later, in 2014, the game now hosted between 50 and 80,000 players on average. This is essentially where the game was at until present day. Though things didn't really change overall, internally there was a massive shift. For a while, RuneScape 3 was the most dominant server. Most players still played on that. However, things started to change in 2015 when the two actually switched. As more players got onto RuneScape Old School, less were on RuneScape 3. Finally, we get to November of 2018 with the official launch of Old School RuneScape Mobile. Remember how I said in the last couple of years the game usually hovered around 50 to 80,000 players? Well, in the last 3 days, both servers have now reached collectively 150,000 players, essentially doubling what the numbers were. Virtually all of them going to old school RuneScape. Guys, in the last 3 days, I can promise you, I've had more fun on RuneScape than I have had in years. Just a couple of weeks ago, you would be lucky if you found maybe 2 or 3 servers with over 1,000 players on it. However, now with Jagex adding even about 30 more servers, you'll find a dozen or so servers with more than 1,000 players. If you go on the first couple of servers, players are jam-packed in Lumbridge Castle and on the streets, hanging out just like they used to back in RuneScape's heyday. And for the first time in who knows how long, honest to God, brand new players are joining RuneScape. To any of my viewers, can you honestly name any other game like it? A game that could have such a massive success in the beginning, crash down so far, but then rise so high once again in such a long period of time? Let me tell you this quick story. When I was in elementary school and I first started playing RuneScape, I loved it so much, I started drawing out my entire bank on the back of my homework. It consisted entirely of a sword and shield, a fishing net, and a tinderbox. Despite its rough times, I've always been a fan of RuneScape. Me and my brother have always played it, even since we were young together. So the fact that this game has regained popularity in ways that it never really had before, I'm really happy. So we're getting to the end here. I want to thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Subscribe for more content like this, and by all means comment. I will see you guys later.